All right, let's talk about data. We always hear about the two extremes, these perfectly neat, organized spreadsheets on one side, and then total chaos, just messy, jumbled files on the other. But what about that huge, super important world that lives right in the middle? Well, that's what we're diving into today, semi-structured data. It's the flexible, surprisingly powerful middle ground that honestly runs a huge part of our digital lives.
So here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to look at the whole data spectrum. Then we'll nail down exactly what semi-structured data is. After that, we'll get into its key features and some real-world examples you've definitely seen before. Then we'll see how it's actually managed, and finally wrap up with its massive impact and, of course, some of the challenges. Let's jump in. To really get a handle on semi-structured data, we've got to zoom out first and look at the big picture. Just imagine that all data exists on this spectrum, right? Ranging from perfectly pristine and organized all the way to completely chaotic. Okay, this slide gives us the perfect way to think about it. Over on one end, you've got your structured data. This is your classic perfectly organized spreadsheet. Every row, every column, it all follows strict rules. On the complete opposite end, you have unstructured data. I mean, think of it as just a random pile of documents on a desk. There's no real order at all. And then, right there in that sweet spot in the middle, that's our hero today, semi-structured data. It's kind of like a filing cabinet. You've got labeled folders, so there's some organization, but what you put inside each folder, that can be totally different. Okay, so now that we know where it lives on the map, let's zoom in. It's time to get a really solid definition and figure out what actually makes this stuff tick. Right. Let's really break down what defines this middle ground. What is it that gives this data its unique mix of organization and freedom? The thing that sets it apart from a super rigid database or just a messy, raw text file. So here's the core concept. It's data that doesn't have to be jammed into a traditional, rigid database. But it's not a total free-for-all either. The magic is that it has these helpful organizational properties, little things like tags or markers that give it a basic level of internal structure. And this is the most crucial part to remember. There's no strict predefined blueprint, or schema as it's called, that every single piece of data has to conform to. Instead, it contains its own descriptions, things like labels or keys, and that's what makes the data understandable, identifiable, and, most importantly, super searchable.
Definitions are one thing, but you don't really get it until you see it in the wild. So let's move on from the abstract and look at its core behaviors and some real-world examples that'll make it all click. These four things are really what make this data so incredibly useful. That flexible schema, it means you're not locked in. A user profile can have totally different fields than, say, a product review, all in the same system. It's also often human-readable, which is a huge deal for developers trying to work with it. That flexibility also makes it scale like crazy for big data. And finally, it's rich with metadata, those built-in tags that give the data its own context. And believe me, you have absolutely seen this data before, probably today. We're talking about things like JSON and XML files, which are basically the foundation of the modern internet. An email is actually a perfect example. It has structured parts like the to and from fields, but the actual body of the message, totally unstructured. Sensor data from your smart devices, even the HTML code that builds web pages, yep, all semi-structured. Let's look at a super simple piece of JSON. See how it works? It's all about these key value pairs. You've got a key, like user, and its value is Alex. It's just so clean, lightweight, and incredibly easy for both a person and a computer program to read and understand in a split second. Now, here's that exact same information, but this time it's in XML. You can see it's doing the same job, just with a different style. It uses these opening and closing tags, like name and then /name, to wrap around each piece of data. This builds a really clear hierarchy, almost like a little family tree for the info, which can be fantastic when you need to search through complex documents. Okay, so we have all this flexible, powerful data. That's great. But how do we actually, wrangle it? Let's get into the practical side of things, how this stuff is actually stored, managed, and ultimately put to good use. Generally, managing this kind of data is like a three-step process. First, you have to extract the useful information, often using specialized tools to make sense of all of it. Step 2, you arrange it into a format that's actually useful, like creating that searchable hierarchy we saw with XML. And then finally, you store and manage it, which is usually done in what are called NoSQL databases, which are built from the ground up for this kind of flexible data. And this is a perfect breakdown of the actual tech involved. For that JSON-style data, a database called MongoDB is an absolute go-to. If you need to search through mountains of log files or documents, something like Elasticsearch is what you'd use. And for just storing massive volumes of things like logs or emails, that's where cloud storage like AWS S3 comes in. So we've covered the what and the how, but now we get to the most important part, the why. Let's talk about why any of this actually matters, where it's making a real impact, and some of the hurdles you might face working with it. And the impact is it's huge, and it's everywhere. In e-commerce, it lets you have these flexible product catalogs where one shirt might have different color options than another. It's literally the lifeblood of all those IoT and smart devices sending back data. Social media platforms use it constantly to log what we do. It's fundamental to web development and is even making waves in things like healthcare records. But hey, it's not without its challenges. Because it's so flexible, asking it questions or querying it can be a bit more complex than with traditional databases. That inconsistency in structure means cleaning up the data to make it all work together can be a much bigger job. And yeah, not every analytics tool out there is built to handle these formats right out of the box. I think this quote just nails it perfectly. It's all about striking that perfect balance, right? You get enough flexibility to deal with the messy, unpredictable real world, but you still have just enough structure to make it manageable, searchable, and incredibly valuable. And that really leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to end on. As the amount and the variety of data just keep exploding, our digital world is only going to get messier. So the real question is, will this in-between data, this flexible middle ground, stop being just an alternative and actually become the new default standard? Something to think about. Thanks so much for watching.